Hi, thank you, Zormar. Can everyone hear me? Yes, maybe?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Audrey. Um, so I wanted to get started. If Charlotte, you can go on to the next slide, that would be great. So my job in this talk is to just give you, oh, sorry, the previous slide. Yeah, thanks. Just a really quick overview of what a grad union does and maybe what NUGW specifically does and what some examples of other grad unions have done and sort of why it's really necessary in this time. And my colleagues who will be talking after me will be talking specifically about the type of union that we really want to have. As Zormar mentioned, we're feminist, we're anti-racist, and that's maybe not officially a part of what I'll be describing, and they will cover more of that. But I just wanted to, also make clear that that is what we are. But more generally, like legally speaking, what is a grad union? It's really simply just a democratic group of graduate workers who will collectively advocate for higher pay, better health insurance, employee protections, and basically just better working conditions. So those 2 points, you might ask, well, what makes it a grad union as opposed to another, just a student group, for example? And for me, the differences really come into the next couple of bullet points, which are one, a union, and specifically a graduate union, has legal protections from retaliation, which I know a lot of folks are worried about. And we've heard a lot of concerns from international students, from lab workers about specifically retaliation. And so there are legal protections when you are working in a union, and whenever you are making demands in a union capacity, you have legal protections. Obviously, these protections really depend on, for example, who is the president and who names the National Labor Relations Board members. But thankfully, we might have a slightly better labor board moving forward. And so I do understand that there are some still, even with legal protections, there are certainly things that you should be concerned about, but they are there. And another way that there is protection from retaliation is our numbers. And I personally believe, and I really strongly believe that the more of us there are in NUGW, the better we can protect each other. And so I've never been afraid of attaching my name in daily articles and whatever, with my name, with my department, with my year, simply because, like, if anything happens to me, I know that everyone else is going to jump in and protect me. So there's protection on both sides. And we know that Northwestern is very concerned with its uh, image. And so that's something to keep in mind. The other 2 bullet points are bolded because we don't technically have that yet, but they're really also really important and differentiate us from other student, maybe government or just other student groups. So one is official recognition by administrators of us as a union, and that also gives us the legal right to bargain collectively for an employment contract. And so a couple of things to point out is that, like, that legal right to bargain collectively is really important because it's the ability to force administration to bargain over our working conditions. And then if they don't either bargain in good faith or just refuse to bargain, we have the legal right to withhold our labor. And that's really important. And so one example I do want to give is this, well, I guess, yeah, this semester, Gage actually had impact bargaining over their reopening process. And the administration had to sit down with them and bargain over the reopening process. Compare that to our reopening process, which is Merkin keeping all of the research labs open because he can do that. And so for me, that's a really, really important distinction between what a union does and just having, for example, GLAC or other student groups. It was Gage, the Georgetown, the very, very recent Georgetown Union. Yeah. And then, so I also wanted to contrast to Morty's latest email, which just came out, um, which I think it came out only a couple, like within the last hour or something like that. And I don't want to call them necessarily weasel words because this is being recorded, and I don't want him to like tell me I'm being like anti-Semitic or something like that. But he said that they're let's see, committed to listening and learning, and specifically to hold ongoing, meaningful conversations with members of the Northwestern community. And the goals are to understand your perspective and discuss how to make our university better. And we hope that these dialogues will provoke meaningful engagement and deep conversation and lead to sustained process. Notice that what he is offering is only conversations. And what he hopes is it leads to sustained progress. And that is fundamentally distinct, very, very different from like a legal process where he is forced to bargain with us over whatever it is that we want. Well, not whatever it is that we want, but certainly, for example, reopening processes, anything that affects our working conditions. And so just want to like really contrast that with just he's opening conversations, but there's no actual commitment to do anything. And so I just want to, I just want to point that out. If we can go to the next slide, I just wanted to point out a couple of examples of grad unions. This is certainly not a exhaustive list, but it does point out a couple of the private schools with grad unions. And this is a relatively new development. So the private universities, let's see, Harvard, Yale, NYU, Brown, Georgetown, those came very, very recently. And then the rest are just a handful of public universities with grad unions so far. And so just to let you know that we're not alone, and these universities certainly haven't imploded or, mentoring relationships haven't deteriorated. And so just that like these exist and they do very, very well. And again, certainly not an exhaustive list. If you can go to the next slide. These are some contracts that came up that were ratified just this year. So Georgetown in May, Brown and Harvard in June. And these are what these particular contracts want. I stole this from somebody. So I didn't make this. Sorry, Mar, if you could just put in the chat who actually made this, because this is fantastic. Chloe, yes, Chloe, that's amazing. So I want, shout out to Chloe, absolutely. And so just notice like there were a couple, like what they won just from their first contract. And I think this chart by Chloe speaks for itself. The one thing that I did want to mention is that at all of these places, there was a sort of precipitating sort of terrible thing that happened that actually pushed the grad union to win the election, essentially. And I think one thing to really point out is at Harvard, the fact that they established these power-based harassment protections really came from Harvard's sexual harassment debacles that really Harvard didn't do anything and just kept these professors in power. And so that was really, debacles, plural, thank you. And so that was really the impetus for that. So I wanted to bring that out. The next thing that I wanted to talk about really briefly, I know I'm running a little bit over, is just a couple of the major NUGW wins, even though we haven't had a contract. And so on the next page, you'll see our personal mascot, Gritty. And so these are like a few of the wins that we've had just from not having a union, a recognized union, but just from organizing internally. Most of these things have to do with funding. So that's the full 5 funding, and paid medical leave, I don't think is exactly funding, but certainly counts, and then some student fees that targeted specific subsections of grad students. I also wanted to throw out the COVID sick out on there just because that was our first labor action, and I think it was really, really powerful. The one thing that I wanted to point out in a lot of these examples, specifically full 5, which was summer funding in your 5th year, and the DMA continuation fee, is that grads had been advocating for years. In the example of full 5, GLAC included, had been advocating for years, and we won basically immediately after circulating a petition and just scheduling a rally. Also with the student international student fee, we scheduled a rally, and then they canceled the fee. And that was it. And so I just wanted to mention that even without having full recognition, these are some real tangible wins. And very specifically that I think they point out a pattern of Northwestern mistreating students when it thinks that it can get away with it. And when they are met with any kind of pushback, they sort of immediately back down. And so I wanted to just mention a couple of things here, and that we have a lot of other campaigns, ongoing campaigns, both related to COVID and other issues that are ongoing that we haven't quite won yet, but that even without a recognized union, we certainly have made a lot of progress. So I'm going to stop here, and we'll be happy to answer any questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kitty. That was wonderful. And now if you have questions, I'll let Andrew take it away.
Yep, send them in, everyone. Any questions? None yet. Let's see. So I have a question from Audrey. Can we go over the recognition process?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about the recognition process. I think that the general process to get recognized would be typically to essentially do a card check. So first we need to get at least 50% of the eligible
The unit.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Andrew. The unit, and have them say that they want to have a union, essentially, or they would like to have an election. Typically speaking, that usually would be enough for a for an administration or for management to say, okay, we respect that, you know, the majority of you want a union, and so we'll go ahead and do that. Of course, most schools and most companies have not been following that. And so if they push for us to actually have an election, then the next step would be to file it in 2 ways. One would usually be to file with the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, and petition to have an election, which they would oversee. Because the last couple of years we've had a really hostile NLRB, most of the grad unions have not gone that route, just because the actual right for private grad workers to unionize, or grad workers at private university to unionize, has been really tenuous. And so the most recent ones, I believe Brown and Georgetown both had third-party arbitrators oversee their election, but that would generally be the process. And then after we win the election, there would be specifically a bargaining process over the first contract, which would then have to be ratified. In terms of voting in favor of a union, the first thing that we probably have to do is figure out who is actually in unit and who's out of unit. And so that's a really difficult thing to answer. But I would say, yeah, anywhere between 2,000 to 3,000 grad workers is probably correct. So we want, somewhere at least 1,000, probably way more, to ensure that we win, of people who actively want to have a union. So that's really tough to say exactly who's in unit and who's out of unit. That's kind of a fight, really. And so if you know about what happened with the non-tenure track faculty, they actually had an election a couple years ago, and it was so close, and it failed because the university was able to sort of push enough people out of unit. Enough of people out of unit for the election to actually fail. And so one thing that I would say is that this will be something that ends up being negotiated. And it will probably end up being about work rather than what department you're in. So certainly when you are a TA, you would be in unit. When you are an RA, I'd like for it to be in unit. But that's that's a process, and that's a discussion and a fight, really, with both the administration and also the NLRB.
Great, thank you, Katie. Any other questions?
I would say we're quite a bit of time out from actually having an election, but we're doing a lot of work that's really necessary to get us there.